All right. Good noon, everybody. Welcome back to Self-Righteous Blood, our study of the book of Judges. We are now to the last chapter in the book, that is chapter 21. In the last few sessions, we talked about this section of the book of Judges. Uh, it's sort of the appendix to the book. The last five chapters, they don't really deal with any of the judges in particular. The meat of the book really deals with them narratively. The last five chapters are really dealing with just some bad things that happen in Israel during the Judges period. In fact, there's pretty strong evidence to say that the essentially it's two incidents that happen really. The both of them happen very early on in the Judges period, namely the mentioning of particular characters who we see earlier in the Bible, and they're young at that point, but they're still around. Take for example Phineas the priest, who we saw in the book of Numbers. I think I said he was in Joshua last week. By the way, that was wrong. He's in Numbers. Um, but you see him around a little bit. So these are definitely things that happened earlier. And the appendix is dealing with some pretty terrible stuff that happens. The two accounts that happen, one of them is talking about how the Danites end up invading the city of Laish and how they brought violence, destruction, and idolatry to that one. And then this second account deals with the incident in which a person, a Levite, and his concubine travel through the city of Gibeah, which was a Benjamite city. How the Gibeonites assault them, get a hold of the concubine, and violate her to death. And it also shows the Levites' cowardice in that particular instance. Then in chapter 20, we saw the instant retribution for that, which was the rest of Israel making war against the Gibeonites, and by proxy, the rest of the tribe of Benjamin as well. We saw how they lost that war in chapter 20, and they lost badly. You might recall that there was a great battle between the Benjamites and the rest of Israel. The Israelites managed to surround the Benjamites, and they win, and they win by a lot. But there is a small remnant that goes off to this stronghold known as the Rock of Ramon, and that's where we've left them at this point. So let's get back up to it here in chapter 21. Verse 1. Now the men of Israel had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. And the people came to Bethel and sat there till evening before God, and they lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. And they said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has this happened in Israel, that today there should be no one tribe lacking in Israel? And the next day the people rose early and built there an altar and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. And the people of Israel said, Which of all the tribes of Israel did not come up with the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, We shall surely put to death. And the people of Israel had compassion for Benjamin their brother, and said, One tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters for wives? All right. Israel is essentially suffering from buyer's remorse at this point. They have decided that their actions have been too harsh. Truthfully, I'm not 100% sure they were. I mean, these are extremely wicked people, as you saw in the previous chapters. But Israel has decided that their actions were too harsh. And certainly you see them coming down strong, and I do think they did do some things that were pretty evil, although you have to do a little bit of reading between the lines to figure that out. And their swiftness to come to a conclusion with the war, they were very zealous when they were angry with Benjamin, and so they made a couple of oaths. One is that nobody would ever give their daughters as wives to the Benjamites, and two, that anybody in Israel who did not come and fight the Benjamites, then they're going to be killed as well. And both of these are going to come into play in this chapter. The other thing we see here is that apparently the Benjamites need wives. This implies, once again, you have to read between the lines here, but this implies a pretty dark turn. This probably indicates then that the Israelites had gone into the Benjamite cities and killed all the women and children, and literally the only Benjamites left were that small section of the Benjamite army that had taken refuge over at Ramon. That's a serious problem. I mean, maybe you might look at the women as complicit in the actions of their husbands before, and that's a strong possibility, especially considering we don't have all of the necessary information to make judgment on this. But of course, the children didn't have anything to do with that. So Israel certainly went too far in that sense with the retribution. And they make these oaths. We're so mad that no one can ever give their daughters to Benjamites. Basically, you're not even going to be related to Benjamites anymore. And two, anybody who doesn't come up and fight, well, they're going to be exterminated as well. But now they've decided, we really like being the 12 tribes of Israel. And yeah, we know there's technically 13 of them, but we really like how those things go. And also, by the way, God made it clear that only Benjamites are supposed to be in this particular area. None of the rest of us can inherit it. So if we let this tribe die out, then there's just going to be this big unused area here in Israel, just inviting somebody to come in and attack us and take that over. Don't really want that either. So we want Benjamin to survive, but they don't have any women anymore. So they're going to use one to fulfill the other. Verse 8. And they said, "What one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah? And behold, no one came from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead were there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men, and commanded them, Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, also the women and the little ones. This is what you will do. Every male and every woman that is lain with a male you shall devote to destruction." And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with them, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is at the land of Canaan. Do you see what's happening here? There's one city called Jabesh Gilead that had not gone and fought against the people of Benjamin. The reasoning is thought to be that the people of Jabesh Gilead were, well, it's not that they were thought to be related to the Gibeonites. They were related to the Gibeonites, the book of 2 Chronicles. Let me check on that. Sorry, 1 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 12 through 15 talks about how those two cities were related. So the reasoning seems pretty obvious, and which is probably because they were related. They didn't want to go and fight. Now, there's kind of two factors to this. There's already been a pattern established in the book of Judges that if a city is acting cowardly or is derelict of its duty, then yes, it can get punished, and righteously so. Right? Gideon does that a couple of times after his war. I think... well, I know Gideon does anyway. I'm not going to make claims on anybody else doing that, but it was a pretty common thing, right? So there's definitely a precedent to punishing somebody for that. They might deserve punishment, but they're going way too far with this, right? If the problem is we need men for this battle and you didn't send men for the battle, then it's the men of the city who should get punished. But it wasn't. It was all the women of the city and even all of the children. There were only 400 survivors once they attacked Jabesh Gilead, and they were all young virgin women. You might be able to see where this is going when you remember that one of their problems is they don't want Benjamin to go away, so they got to get them some wives. And so they take them, and in verse 13, then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin, who were at the rock of Ramon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, but they were not enough for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin before the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. So what they do is they take these 400 young virgins, bring them up to the rock of Ramon, where, remember, the remnant of the Benjamites, they're still hiding up there. And they say, hey, we're not mad at you anymore. Why don't you come down? We'll give you these women as wives. Josephus records, the Bible doesn't, but Josephus records that at this point the Benjamites apparently repented of the sins they had committed. So I guess that makes us feel a little bit better. But I gotta tell you, I got problems with commentators who try to say that this was somehow a good deal for the women of Jabesh Gilead, as if this was merciful. No, first of all, it's pretty clear the main reason that everybody in that got killed was specifically to kidnap these women and present them as wives to Benjamite. I mean, guys, that's barbaric behavior. I don't care who you are. I don't care what time you're living in. That's barbaric behavior. They bring them over there, and essentially, I mean, they're called wives, but let's call it what it is: sexual slavery. That's what it is. Let's go on. Oh, something I forgot to mention earlier on, by the way. I made a note of it and forgot to mention it. Verse 4. You might notice it says that they built an altar. That's an unauthorized altar. There should only ever be one altar to God, and that one already existed. It was in the tabernacle. The tabernacle, by its nature, could move around a little bit. Chapter 20 seems to indicate that the tabernacle had been in Bethel for a bit. Even though the default spot seemed to be Shiloh, it could move around a little. But certainly they had no business building an altar of their own. So don't think that even though they're offering burnt offerings and peace offerings, don't think that they're acting in a pleasing way to God. They did not learn their lessons from chapter 20. All right. Verse 16. Then the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give them wives from our daughters, for the people of Israel had sworn, Cursed be he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, Behold, there is the yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanah. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards, and watch it the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances. Then come out of the vineyards, and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, Grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle, neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number, from the dancers whom they carried off. Then they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt their towns, and lived in them. And the people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family, and they went out from there, every man to his inheritance. So, after these 400 virgins from Jabesh Gilead are brought over to the Benjamites, turns out it's still not enough. So, how are they going to do this? Well, they've sworn this oath, and they got to keep it. Especially during the Judges period, a common theme you see in Judges is people making really stupid oaths. And they feel like they got to keep this oath. So what are we going to do? Okay, here's the plan. Shiloh, people in that city, they have a party every single year. They go out in the dark, and presumably they're getting drunk, and they're going around and they're dancing and doing all this. Benjamites, this is what you do. You wait in ambush. You hide in the darkness. And you wait for one of the women who dance around, you wait for one of them to start to get close enough to you, and you grab her and you run home with her. And this is what we'll do. When the brothers and fathers and the families of these women inevitably are infuriated by this, we'll say, hey, relax, man, it's okay. You didn't break your oath because you swore an oath not to give your daughters to them, but you didn't give them, they just sort of took them away, so everything's all right, and we'll make peace, and then you Benjamites, you go back to your home territory, and everything will work out. And that's precisely what they do. The great irony, of course, is the reason the Israelites were mad at the Benjamites in the first place was because of their violation of a woman. Now here's a whole bunch of women you can violate. Wonderful. It disgusts you the more you think about it. It shows this perverse, to allude to the title of our lesson series, self-righteous idea of what morality should be. You go ahead and you kidnap as many women as you want. That's fine. Because we kept our oaths. Aren't we so good? The very last line in the book of Judges comes in verse 25. In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. It's not the last, it's not the first time, rather, we've seen that phrase in the book of Judges. As we pointed out, it shows up a lot. Once again, the reasoning here is the same reason as every other time it shows up. It's expected that, like us, a reader is going to be looking through the book of Judges, see that, and then ask the question, how on earth were they able to get away with that? You know, we might not be as apt to ask that question because we think of it as such a different and completely alien time to us. But we know why someone couldn't get away with this kind of stuff, say, here in America, or you certainly hope they wouldn't be able to get away with this sort of stuff, right? There's no king here, but there is law of the land. There is enforcement of that law of the land. If you do some of this nonsense, you're going to face the wrath of that law and you're going to be punished for it. But at that time, no. There was no king in Israel, and every man did what was right in his own eye. The end of the book of Judges is a stark warning against self-righteousness. It's a warning against the idea that I know what is best morally. You want to know what happens when everybody decides for themselves, I'm going to choose what is right and what is wrong? We get the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges. We get the most vile things happening in the Bible that happen in the entire book. Because here's the thing. Even though each person has an innate sense of right and wrong, unless there's something wrong with them, it's not enough. Right? Because you can see people acting in a manner in which they are considering righteousness. But the question you have to ask yourself is, whose righteousness am I considering? Am I considering my righteousness? What I'm worried about, or am I concerned about what God is concerned about? Because when we're concerned about what God is concerned about, that sort of thing doesn't happen. The book of Judges warns us about how we are to treat our lives in our righteousness. The Bible tells us to be righteous. Jesus said, "Blessed is he who hungers and thirsts for righteousness, for he shall be filled." Most people hunger and thirst for righteousness in some form, right? Most people want to think of themselves as good people. But very few people actually want to go to the source of righteousness and look to him and trust in him to find what is good and evil. Instead, they'd rather trust in themselves. Well, here we see the end result of that. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to study the book of Judges with me. We're going to take a little bit of a break from this series. I got a few things coming up. Of course, we got the holidays coming up, and then I actually have a trip to Kenya planned in early January. And for my Kenyan friends who watch this, I hope very much to get to see you soon. Lord willing, we'll get to speak again. I know it's been a while, and hopefully we'll get some good done together. All right? When we get back in mid or maybe a little bit later January, because going to Kenya takes a lot out of me, and it takes me about maybe about a week to get back into the full swing of things. So I might need just a little bit of time and some of your patience. But when we get it back into things, we will start a new study. And that study is going to be on the life of Christ, specifically as recorded in the books of Mark, Matthew, and Luke. The fourth book, which records the life of Christ, which is John, it records it from a much different perspective than those three. So we're going to be focusing on those three to talk about the life of Christ. The life of Christ is one of my favorite topics when it comes to the Bible. After all, we are Christians. Our whole goal is to try to emulate who Christ was. And We got to know who he was in order to do that. Jesus might well be the single most misunderstood character in all of history. So we're going to take some time to try to really dive into who he was and who he is. I look forward to getting to spend some time studying that with you. In the meantime, I love you all and hope to see you again soon. Bye.